All right, welcome to Agriscaping. This is our podcast, and I've got a great special guest. This is Justin Rohner coming at you, and my special guest today is the founder of Flower Street Urban Gardens. This is Alex Billingsley. Say hello, Alex.
Hello. How's it going, Justin?
It is going good, and I love talking to you. I mean, every chance I can, we run across each other's paths every now and then here in the Phoenix area. And
Yeah.
always been impressed with your gardens. Every time I go to the TV show and I'm doing a little TV bit, I drive by your place and see your beautiful gardens on that wall off 44th Street there. And it's
Yeah, that gets a lot of attention out there for us.
oh, it absolutely does. I think every time I've driven by, there's always someone walking by it at the same time. And normally people kind of watch the road as they're walking on a busy street. But as they walk by your place, they're always watching the flowers. They're watching those boxes.
They do.
Those out.
They're watching the gardens, and we just switched them out for the summer. So we got the heat tolerant and the intense afternoon sun tolerant plants. But during this fall, for the first time out on the street, we did a community garden out there. So it was all full of food through the fall and winter months here in Phoenix. And when we switched them out, we did get some emails from some neighbors that they hadn't been buying produce for a while.
That's awesome. And so when you did that switch out, did you let everybody know? I mean, did you make it known to everybody, or was it something that people just noticed and started foraging off of it?
You know, I think people just noticed. We did put some few little things out on our social media sites and let people know what we do plant in them, because that's one of the questions that we get a lot is, I've got this microclimate, what would be good in container gardening, because in essence that's what we do is vertical container gardening. And so we utilize a lot of your resources that you've created through the edible planting calendar for our local people as well, but then we fine tune it a bit. So we do post out there what we put out in the street, but quite honestly, out on the street there's always somebody's eyes on that to notices what's going on, and gardeners in the area, they notice the Swiss chard and the lettuce and radishes and all that kind of good stuff we had growing in there for the cooler months here. And that's really what the whole street is intended for. It's intended for the community. I only see it if I happen to be driving up the street. But a lot of times when I take off from here, I'm heading the opposite direction. So it could be weeks before I actually see what it looks like and walk over there and take a peek at how things are going. So there's a lot more eyes on that application. And one of the great things is that wall used to be tagged. It's right there on the street. And knock on wood, it has not been tagged once in almost 5 years. Those gardens have been up now.
Now, isn't that interesting? I mean, a living wall doesn't seem to attract the tagging, huh? That's nice.
It really doesn't, and literally, I mean, it was once a month at least I would be calling the graffiti hotline to come and paint that wall and,
wow,
get rid of the graffiti on it. And I think that, that goes a lot to say about humankind is you put something beautiful out there and, for the most part, they've never really been vandalized in any way, and they're out there for the enjoyment of the community.
Well, it's interesting with all the kids and gangs and other things that kind of going around here and there. I mean, I know there's been a lot of crackdown on those type of gangs. Different lifestyle in our, or a different type of upbringing that kids are getting these days. And I'm really curious. I mean, gardening itself. Some people say you either got a green thumb or you don't got a green thumb. But I'm curious about your background. I mean, how were you raised, or where were you raised? Was Phoenix always your home?
No. My wife and I moved to Phoenix in 1984, right after we were married. But I grew up in rural Nebraska.
Oh, wow.
About 8 miles north of Omaha, in a rural farming community. Population 750. I think it's probably about the same still. And I grew up with my great-grandparents, and my grandparents shared a home together and had a root cellar and always had gardens. And my first memory as a small child was messing around out in the garden, and apparently I was messing a little bit too much with some peppers. and either broke one and it squirted my eyes, or I wiped my eyes or something. And my first memory is running around my great-grandparents and grandparents' home screaming with my great-grandfather and my mother chasing me because I got this pepper juice in my eyes and it was burning. So that's not the most pleasant memory of gardening, but that was my first memory of gardening, and going down in the root cellar and watching my grandmother and my mother and great-grandmother can, and but never was really into it. And then, you know, my career took a completely different direction, and I did consulting and had to be on planes 150 flights a year.
Oh my goodness.
For about 28 years, and got tired of that and enjoyed it and learned a lot. But I'm having just the time of my life right now with doing gardens.
Well, I'm with you on that, and I certainly didn't have my first memory with pepper juice in my eyes, but I do share being in the garden as one of my first memories. Just peas, like a pea plant. I remember barely being able to walk and being just enamored by a pea plant, that you could eat this thing and it grew. And so it's and like you, I think many of us that are gardening today and are making a profession out of it didn't start off that way. You know, we jumped into different other careers and in a way kind of burned ourselves out, and have returned home to our roots, I guess you could say, and enjoying life on many levels. Is that about right for you?
It really is. And, you know, I think a lot of people think that, you know, gardening is all trendy and everything now. But if you really think about it, you know, I remember my going as a child to spend summers with my aunt and uncle in Michigan. And my aunt was one of those hippies. And we ate weird stuff when we were with her, all this health stuff that you never really seen before. So I think what's happened is where we're at today was really started back in the late 60s through the 70s. You know, that's where everything happened. But at that time, they were looked at, you know, as hippies and sort of on the fringe. And now that trend is completely turned, and now everybody wants to be gardening and so conscientious about our food. And I think we've learned more along the way about big agriculture and how there's nothing quite like here in Phoenix today. The peaches are amazing on the trees. We can go out and grab a peach, and when you can go out and get fresh produce from your own yard, bring it in, and serve it to your family and loved ones, there is nothing better for our bodies, for our spirit, I believe, than being able to do that kind of interaction with plants, the earth, our families. It's an amazing process.
Yeah. It's like families and communities are built around food. And when you can grow it and you're that connected to it from start to finish, it's not like you're just opening up a package. I mean, I've never seen someone like go up to somebody else and say, you know, open up a bag of something, and it's like they have this great, really connecting, you know, conversation about where it was, you know, where it came from or anything like that. If anything, they're complaining about the carbs, or they're complaining about the things, of the ingredients in the package. But with your vegetables grown from your garden, I mean, there's always a deeper, more meaningful conversation inherent, you know, when you go out and pick something right from the garden and share it with somebody else. It's a beautiful experience.
It really is. And then you can extend your harvest by, I know we do a lot of seed collection, and some of them that we do, you know, a month or so ago was a lot of the brassicas. So we go out, and obviously the broccoli was already well into seed, but going out and having those seed pods and cooking those in stir fries, putting them over salads. Those are items that now what we're finding with some of our customers, some of the chefs, is they're deliberately letting these things go to seed.
Yeah.
But you're telling them, oh, you need to pinch back the basil. Well, now the mixologists are wanting those basil flowers to garnish drinks and garnish dishes. And you just can't, you can't go and buy that stuff.
No, I mean, you can't, I mean, we had broccoli flowers. So broccoli flowers were huge at our market down here in Gilbert. And at
Mm-hmm.
first people had no clue. You can eat those? And I was like, yeah, we let them bloom. That's my favorite time to eat a broccoli. It's not when it's the small little buds, but when it's actually blooming, the big yellow blooms, they're so sweet, so tender, so full of life and flavor. And people don't normally experience that. You can't, like you said, buy it unless you got a really good source. It's got to be so local that it's not going to spoil, or it's easy to transport, all those kind of things. It's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, that's where we're evolving to, I think, as people that are more aware about our food and, being able to do gardens, even if it's containers or vertical gardens, living walls, in ground. I mean, all of those things are applicable to where we're at right now in the food system and trying to make a change one garden at a time,
Now, it's perfect. What you're up to right now is helping, I think, bring more production per square foot than we've ever had in the past. And I'd love to know a little bit more how these wall gardens even came about. These Flower Street urban gardens. I mean, it's a perfect little setup to be able to grow in a soil-based environment right on a wall. And how did you arrive at this creation of yours?
Well, it was about 5 years ago. I was fortunate enough to have my father move in with my family here. And he was at the age that he could no longer be on his own. And his last job is he managed a 30,000-acre cattle ranch for a family down on the border of Arizona and New Mexico right there on the border. And so he was riding horses, had his favorite mule he'd go out in the trails with. And about 5 years ago, that became apparent to him that he could no longer do that. And I was having a conversation with my wife, what are we going to do? And without hesitation, she says, well, he'll move in with us. Mm-hmm. And knowing that he was always active and I was dabbling a little bit and had some raised beds and some in-ground gardening and it's always sort of dabbled in it a little bit. But my real background and professionally was in design. And I decided I had this perfect wall on the back of my home to build a garden for my father because he couldn't bend over to work in raised beds or in-ground gardening. Mm-hmm. And I started doing research. I went online like all of us do and started looking at vertical walls and vertical gardens, living walls. And what I found was a couple of things. One is they weren't really, some of them weren't soil-based, and I wanted soil-based. They simply weren't deep enough to grow food. There just wasn't enough soil. And some of them were really complicated, or some of them were just, for my design background, they were just ugly. And when I came up with this idea, I talked to my wife about it, and she says, yes, you can do it, but it better look good.
Hey.
And so with that, over the course of a couple of weekends, sitting down and doing some drawings and doing a little bit of fabrication, I came up with the first vertical garden on the back of our home. And shortly after that, some friends and colleagues seen it, and they're like, dude, this is really cool. And so we got an attorney involved and started the process of doing research to see if it was something that could be protected, which it ultimately was. And so we're at the final stages of the patent with that. And once we got some legal things where I thought we could show it, then I put a couple out on the front of the house by the street. And for those of you that never really been to Phoenix that may be listening, we live on 44th Street and Flower. That's Flower is how the company got its name, Flower Street Urban Gardens, and it's a main corridor in and out of Phoenix Sky Harbor and up to a lot of the big fancy resorts up in North Scottsdale and Paradise Valley. So it's just a heavily traveled street. Once I put the first two out there, literally that week, people started pulling in our driveway, taking pictures, knocking on our door. Where did you get these? And then I realized, I think I might be onto something. And then we end up putting 10 more down the side of the street. And literally it's the street, the sidewalk, our block wall, and did a major application out there. And that's how Flower Street Urban Gardens started. And now this week, it's just been crazy. Within 5 weeks, and as an entrepreneur, and just like you would recognize, you have those days where you think, oh my gosh, what am I doing? And then other days, man, this is amazing. And then could be later that afternoon, you know, we're beating up on ourselves again, and going through that process now after 5 years, it seems to really be taking off. We're getting, this week we've shipped 20 gardens all over the country.
Wow.
From the East Coast to West Coast, and so it's just really exploding. And a couple of things is we're on a couple of different websites, and then plus our own. And when we ask people, how did you find us, we're up there on the first page or the first item on a Google search for vertical gardens and living walls. So all that time and effort, now it seems to really be paying off. And so now as things are waning for our summer here in Phoenix, it's picking up with sales out of state. And so that is really, it all started with my father and wanting to create a hobby for him. And so he enjoys the gardens, and been our biggest cheerleader through the whole process, and couldn't have done it without that inspiration.
Well, and I love that. I love that story. For myself, too, I realized that the aged population, especially those that are closest to us, our closest ones, our grandfathers, our fathers, our mothers or fathers-in-laws and mothers-in-laws, it's like that generation of family that has gone before us and is before us now, as they age, we want to serve them in some way. And as we do so, it calls out some of our greatest creativity. I love that this whole concept was born out of that creativity that was really rooted in love for your father. And that's awesome. I love it. And we're in the process right now. I'm in the middle of plastic all over my walls inside my house because we're actually converting a portion of our home into a space for my in-laws to move in a similar circumstance where they really are no longer in a situation where they can remain alone. And they've got to make a transition, make a shift. And boy, has it called out some creativity on my side, and it's coming from a much deeper place than you typically reside in on a regular daily basis when you're wanting to create something beautiful for a family member like that you love.
You know, that's so true. But you know, if you really think about it now, in sort of our so-called modern society, many times our families and the ones closest to us, it's fractured. We're in different parts of the country, and you know, it makes it very difficult. But it was just, you know, if you think about it, a couple of generations ago, families didn't move like that, and it was just something that was expected. You know, you're gonna, as a parent, you take care of your children as they're young, and you are called on to take care of your parents at a certain time. So I think, you know, historically, this is something that I think we as a species have really always evolved to do, and I think it helps us as adults really to be more patient and kind and caring to those around us, because it does take more patience than I know I am naturally endowed with to do those processes. But I think that's just part of growing and humbling in as you evolve as a person. And so I look at it, it's been a challenge, but it's been the best gift and blessing to be able to do that. And now, you know, we have our gardens in different assisted living centers really around the country. The most recent one, my wife is the one that fields all the phone calls as they come in and stuff, and she had a call from a gal from Washington, D.C. Wow. And her mother was an avid gardener, and now she's in an assisted living center. And when they placed her in this assisted living center and she got to know some of the other residents there, many of these other women were in garden clubs when they were younger. And so she had this great idea of starting a garden, and they had a perfect wall. And now we have a large garden application in Washington, D.C., about a half a mile from the White House, which just blows me away that our gardens that I created here in our backyard, now they're assisting other people in their life to bring something back to them, because the generation of people that are in those centers now, they are the ones that grew up with gardens and their parents. And you think about it, and during the war, during World War II, I mean, it was a government thing from the president on down to do victory gardens.
Yeah.
And they sent out, plans and papers and newspapers all over the country. Here's how you do your gardens. And there's some estimates that there was over 40% of the food production in the U.S. during World War II came from backyard gardens.
Wow.
And, so these people that are aging right now, it's a way for them to get into touch with things from their youth. And there's nothing more precious than being in touch with your youth.
I know in a memory care unit we were doing some work with earlier this week, they're looking for more gardening and stuff as well. I mean, you think of all the dementia and things that seem to be present in our aging population right now. It's like that gardening is one of the things that they seem to remember. They know how to do. They just like you were saying, it was part of their upbringing. They were the victory gardeners, and it holds a lot of memory for them as well as a lot of good memory, and it also helps just improve their vitality and longevity. And if they are allowed to eat the food that they have, that's one interesting thing we've seen as a potential hinderment is their ability to actually eat the stuff they grow, but we're finding some ways to help serve that and help expand the opportunity for those memory care units and some of these more government-run facilities to be able to allow their patrons to eat of the food that they're growing, not just grow it for the sake of education or just an enjoyable activity or hobby. But that's kind of a different side story, just different dynamics of when we're bringing food home again, how interesting the rules have changed. That there's those out there would like to govern even what food we grow for ourselves, not just if we're selling it to others, but just curious little things that are happening.
Oh, there really is, and it's happening. We're doing this with restaurants all over and hotels and stuff. And one that I'm most proud of is my dad he's a retired vet too.
Oh,
and
awesome.
goes down to the Veterans Hospital here on 7th Street in Indian School, and veterans contacted us, and we have therapy gardens down there. With the angular design of our gardens, you can roll up to these in wheelchairs. Mm-hmm. And where a lot of times when people are trying to do gardens for handicapped people, they raise the beds up higher. But still, I've watched and observed that process, and they're sitting in a wheelchair with their upper body turned, which is really uncomfortable. So by being able to roll right into these gardens and be able to put your hands straight out in front of you and get into the soil, all those great microbes and stuff that live there that are good for us as humans, it's calming, and they have whole programs for garden therapy. So there's some amazing things happening out there. So it's so many different levels to it. It's almost infinite what I see. I mean, because it is the food production, it's the calming, it's the reconnection with youth for people with dementia. There's just so many amazing layers in it. I think we're really fortunate to be in this sort of business and being able to provide that to others.
Yeah, and with the shrinking of our traditional landscaping space, I mean, they keep getting smaller. The more closer we get to these cities, I mean, it's an urban trend that's continuing to go. Our space to grow is even smaller, and your boxes, your beautiful Flower Street urban garden boxes, are a really awesome way to be able to grow in these shrinking spaces. I mean, it's awesome. I mean, I love mine. The two that I've got and I've had for years, man, love those things. We love growing on those things, and we love sharing them anytime someone comes to a tour. and hopefully,
You know, when you talk about the urban areas,
yeah,
when we're in some of these urban areas, and you don't have the land space, but even if you did have a little bit of land space, you've got these tall buildings and things that can obstruct actually the photosynthesis. You're not getting enough sunlight down. So when you're going vertical, you can grab more sunlight in a lot of different microclimates than you would if it was on the ground. So it gives you that that production by being able to grow vertical. And we sort of, you know, a lot of gardeners, they know about square foot gardening and how amazing that whole process and that whole way of gardening to really maximize the space. And what we, with our gardens, and when you're doing vertical gardening, you're really doing square foot gardening. It's multiplied, because you're going up. So in you know, some of our mobile gardens and things like that, you know, it takes up like 6 square feet on the ground, but you get 36 square feet of growing space, which when you think about it, that's just crazy. To be able to get that kind of production out of that small of a space. And it's just gardening made easy. You don't have to deal with the weeds, and you can control every aspect of it. Control the soil that you choose to use, control the fertilizers that you want to use. It's easy to do the soil test in them and, you know, really get some amazing productions out of it. And, you know, a lot of times people will ask us, like we mentioned earlier, we changed out all of the gardens there on 44th and Flower a few weeks ago. And basically what we ended up doing with those gardens is that it had been almost 5 years that they had been out there with the same soil. And typically what we would do is just add compost, because you'll lose volume of the soil. We'll add compost, good living compost, back in there. This time what we did is we actually popped off the end caps, which are just wedge fit in a residential application. We pull off those end caps. We did take the plants out and let the soil dry out. We turned the irrigation off for a few days and literally took the liners and pulled them right out of the gardens, dumped them, and added about a half a cubic foot of good compost, mixed it into the soil, added a good organic slow-release fertilizer, and put that right back into the garden. So you don't necessarily have to change your potting soil, but you need to add to it all the time.
Yeah.
So with your good organic fertilizers, adding compost to keep things topped off, and you know, we find earthworms in those things.
All the way up on the wall.
I've never seen a ladder. I have no idea. Maybe they come in with plants or something that we get from nurseries. But it always amazes me how even when you take and you put that garden up, the one on the back of the house, the top of the garden is about 7 feet off the ground. You still have that kind of life in there if you're providing everything that you need to for the soil. Because as gardeners, you know, what a lot of people think about is, as a gardener, you're growing food. And to me, I've always, coming from Nebraska and moving down here where you don't really have that good of soil, it didn't take me long to realize what I really need to grow is soil and then seeds. And if you get those two things right, you're going to eat really well in between. So growing soil to grow seeds and to eat in between. And that is the kind of practice. It doesn't matter if it's in-ground gardening, raised bed, or vertical gardens, you know, in a soil-based medium. Those should be your number one things, and that's what we help people with, understanding the soil composition and, you know, what the potting soil medium should be to get the best production.
That's right. And in these raised beds, it's obviously a little bit different. In ground, it's a totally different ballgame. But in these raised beds, the way you mix the soils, the way you're continually adding nutrients, that's the perfect way to roll. And something I've always loved about your gardens, and I don't know if it's just your genius. I guess it's your genius at play, Alex. And what it is, those angle that you've got there. I've got my beds facing south, and so it's in pretty blaring heat a lot of the time. But in the summertime, that angle helps shade the soil, so the soil base is always shaded. But in the wintertime, that soil, the sun angle is a little bit different, and it actually warms the base of that soil. And so I've been able to grow basil even in the coldest time of the winter. I've been able to grow basil in my top beds of my Flower Street Urban Gardens, where everybody else has gotten rid of their basil, and I'm growing basil in January and February, just because that soil is being warmed up by the lower angle of the sun in the wintertime. And then it's still growing in the same bed right now in the summertime because the soil is now cooler a little bit because it's now shaded because the sun's more directly above. So I don't know if you meant to do that,
exactly.
But it's awesome.
No, I didn't. That was, I didn't, because people ask me how I came up with this idea, and I can't take credit for it. It was as I went through that process for a few weeks, messing around with this design, it literally, I feel like it was a gift from a higher place. It came together so easily, and then as I started working it, all of these things revealed themselves to me, because the first garden I placed for my father, it is a southern exposure. It actually wraps around the corner of the house, but it's a southern exposure, and then it revealed itself to me. It's like, wow, this is brilliant. And I feel like I really didn't have nothing to do with that. It was truly a gift. But it does really matter. And that's when what I learned from you and taking the Agriscape courses, which was hugely valuable for me to get. I always thought as a learner, when you first learn something, it's almost like you're just snorkeling on the surface. And then the more you understand these basic elements and concepts, then you start scuba diving a little bit deeper and deeper into the same information. And then all of a sudden now you're diving down to the Titanic with your understanding of these basic elements of what it is that you're doing. And when it came to this, with, like you had mentioned, the warming of the sun on the soil during the winter months, and how that angle, it shades, so it extends your harvest. But understanding microclimates that I learned from you, and now this is creating a microclimate within a microclimate.
Yep.
Because that's how simply this stuff can be done, and also how deeply it really is to understand it. There's microclimates within microclimates, depending on, angles and lines, shadows, how those are cast. So that's interesting that you've observed that too in that same southern exposure garden.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things when I first started developing that microclimate mapping system that we run now with the 6 different microclimates, I actually had 24 different microclimates, and one of my main reasons to wanting to keep some of those had everything to do with the angular differences in the sun. But teaching 24 microclimates isn't very easy, nor is it easy to remember. It's kind of ridiculous. And so we had to narrow it down. But one of the reasons I was really wanting to keep the 24 was actually because of my experiences with your raised beds and the distinctive difference that we were getting from something that was high above the ground and got that angular effect that could warm that soil. So I was like, oh, but I need to make people aware. But then I started realizing that that's more at a mastery level, and not everybody's at that level. And so we developed the 6 levels.
And that's the whole scuba diving.
Yeah, it's the scuba diving.
That's the whole scuba diving, and deeper in the same basic elements of, your discipline. Whatever that discipline may be, it's those same basic elements, just understanding them at a deeper level. And so with my experience with vertical gardening and, putting them on every conceivable exposure and microclimate, and then understanding those 6 different microclimates through my education that I had received through the Agriscaping online courses, it helps you to just fine-tune what it is that you're doing. And that's what everybody wants. They just want to be able to be successful. And so when we work with customers, like I said, we utilize your planting calendars, the Agriscaping planting calendars, and give those to everyone that purchases a garden here in the Maricopa County area. And we let them know, in Washington, D.C., go to the Agriscaping website. You can get that information fine-tuned for your zip code. But it's those kind of elements that once people get success, then they're going to want to learn more, and they'll just, it's more enjoyable.
Yeah, I love the patience that it starts to teach people. I think today's day and age is so wanting things so fast, they often forget, you know, the true nature of their life is based on things that grow a little slower. It's not a fast food thing. And learning how to grow food at home really, I think, it's changing people without a doubt. I've been able to experience a lot of people changed and mellowed and, you know, beautified just as people, as a culture. You know, I've never found a garden club that just wasn't full of awesome people, just really down to earth, just great people. And I love it. You know, it's like I've been to plenty other events where I've been a public speaker and doing things, and there's a lot of salty characters in those groups, but it's cool because I started finding the same people showing up to the garden clubs and some of these garden shows that I've done. And when they show up from the gardening place in their life, so no matter where the background is, no matter what their political leaning is, when they're coming from the garden place in their life, they're better people. They're easier to communicate with. They're more balanced in their ability to communicate differences or challenges or disagreements. They mitigate them differently just coming from the gardening place in their heart. And have you noticed that? I don't know if that's just me seeing this thing, or is that a real thing?
I think it's a real thing, because it really is true. You know, it's coming from more of a place of beauty and what's coming from Mother Earth. And regardless if it's a succulent garden that people are into right now, if it's a flower garden, or if it's edibles, you know, people have that connection. And I think those are things that, if we think about it, that's something that we as a species have been connected to for a very, very long time. We had to. And those are things that are like deepest in who we are as humans. And to be connected with that brings out the best, like you said.
Well, I love that you're helping bring out the best in everybody. I mean, just having that available, making it simpler and easier for people to grow things no matter where they live. I mean, there's nobody that has a space that can't have a Flower Street urban garden. There really isn't. And because they look so pretty, because they produce so well, there's really no excuse not to have one. So if you have, I mean, what's the smallest one you have? I mean, I don't mean to really plug you as much as I am, but I'm serious. It's a fact. You know, what Elon Musk is doing with solar and making it look good and make it cheaper and stuff like that, you're making it easier. You're making gardening easier. You're making it beautiful again. You know, you're finding ways to make it integrate. I mean, I'm on your website right now at flowerstreeturbangardens.com, and the main picture right there on a balcony, you've got your gardens right there on a balcony, and they look amazing. It like enhances the balcony. You can even see beyond a couple other balconies in other areas. They look terrible by comparison to this beautiful balcony with your Flower Street Urban Gardens. And I see a number of edible plants actually integrated into these planters as well.
Yeah, that's actually right down on the waterfront in Scottsdale, on the second level of a fitness center, and that patio there they use as a yoga studio. And you know, they called us in to do that, and it's really just bringing life in. And when you think about people are practicing yoga and breathing and, you know, going through that process of being more connected to your body, what a better way than bring some plants in there. And there are some amazing edible plants there. But our smallest gardens that we do, you know, are the single level, which, you know, can be great for a balcony railing or, you know, an apartment complex and stuff like that. The interesting thing on that website, on the cover photo, those aren't bolted on. They literally just hang there. That's our number one application. And what makes them so unique is when people get one of our gardens that actually hang over the top of a railing or fence, that the only tool you need to put them together is a tape measure to space the brackets. Everything slides into the bracketing system, and it all wedge fits. And some of the commercial applications, we have a different type of an end cap that they're screwed in, but you want them to be easy to service, because that's the biggest thing with gardening is you need to make things as easy as possible. And servicing your garden, you know, like we did on the street, after 5 years, took it apart, redid the soil. You know, if it was all screwed and nailed together, it would take a whole lot more time to do. This way, it was an afternoon. Me and one of my guys, Mike, was out there, and within the afternoon, we had the whole thing done. And those, there's 10 4-tiered gardens out there, and those are big gardens. They're 6 feet wide, and each level holds just under 3 cubic feet of soil. So it doesn't take long to do the math on that one. That's a lot. That's a lot of soil.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that makes ours so easy. But our smallest units, we do them in the smallest one is 3 foot wide. We do 3, 4, 5, and then the 6 foot increments. But what's really unique about our system is those can be butted up to one another and joined together. So if you have a span, this morning we did an installation, and the guy wanted it to fit perfectly in between the upright columns on his cinder block fence in his backyard. Well, the block fence was 10 feet. The columns were 10 feet apart, so we had to recess those in there. So the 2 5-foot units, boom, completely filled the space up. So you can join them together that way to make them customizable. We have the corner brackets. They can go around outside corners. And when we ship them, we shipped one to Houston today, and it was a 1-tiered garden. The 1-tiered, we do them also hanging, but then the other application that is seemingly more popular when we ship is the direct mount or the bolt-on units. Now, those can be bolted to any structural vertical surface. And so they don't actually hang over the top of a wall like we do here. There's so many of these cinder block walls in Phoenix and Southern California. But those applications are really nice. And the 1-tiered units, a lot of people use them as an amazingly beautiful window boxes. And with the different sizes, they'll fit pretty much under any size window and look really great there. And then we just shipped 2 days ago, we shipped to La Crosse, Wisconsin, one of our biggest single units, which is a 6-foot long, 5-level garden, and shipped that to La Crosse, Wisconsin. That's a bolt-on unit that the gal bought it as an anniversary gift for her husband who loves gardening, and they're gonna bolt it on the side of their home. With ours, we manufacture these food-grade liners that are in each one, and then there's a special drainage material that ensures that whatever you put it on doesn't get wet. It drains, each level drains into the one below it, which a lot of the vertical gardens that you see out there and that DIYers are making up can be pretty cool, but you can't really put them on your house like that because they would damage your home.
Yeah. And
on the bottom level, we have a stainless steel wire that makes that drainage material really adjustable, so it won't drip on your home or on the footing of whatever you're putting it on. We also have catchment trays that can be placed underneath those bottom ones, and then basically you've got this amazing compost tea that you can recycle and put back into your garden. So there's very little water that's wasted. The gardens only take about a gallon of water per 6-foot section to water. That one out on 44th Street that so many people see, when it's above 105, which it's there today here in Phoenix, that irrigation goes off once a day for 15 minutes, which provides about a gallon of water. One of the things that we talk to people about, and we get some eyebrows raised, is we recommend setting the timers for our gardening to go off during the hottest part of the day. It's drip irrigation. When you're working in containers, you're really not getting evaporation from your drip irrigation, what you're getting is a cooling effect on the roots. And especially in these extreme climates that we have here, that 2 o'clock in the afternoon, to get a nice cool soaking of water, like I said, you're really not getting evaporation. And what we find works best is we use this material that was actually developed in Israel, and it's the spaghetti line, but every 6 inches it has an embedded emitter, so it's a measured amount of water that comes out of those emitters. They don't tend to clog. We don't have any filtration system on it. They don't tend to clog up very easily. It holds up great to our sun. And it's very inconspicuous because the feed line, which is the spaghetti line, the 1/4-inch poly tubing, it runs inside the unit. So the only thing you see is the little piece from where it plugs into your irrigation at the ground. You know, if you're gonna set it up with irrigation, or you can just water them by hand. But those kind of elements are things that really set our gardens apart from a lot of other things that you see.
Yeah, and I know that we one of the first things we did was make sure we had that automated watering system on ours, because it was a concern, especially in the Phoenix area where we have such dry, arid conditions through the summertime. And I'm with you. If you can water at the root in the afternoon when it's hot, yeah, it cools the soil. It gives the nutrients to the plant when it needs it most. And if you're spray watering, though, that's when we tell people don't spray in the middle of the day. If it dries on the leaves, it'll kill the leaves, and you got some major problems. But if you're watering at the roots, it's a great time to be watering, even in the middle of the day. And yeah, just like you said, you don't lose evaporation when you got the right soil and when you got some good living space. You know, if you've grown the soil first, then you won't have to worry about the evaporation because it's going to hold the moisture in at a level that the roots can then accommodate, right?
Exactly. And, you know, when you think about that, with the irrigation, I mean, because when we first put those gardens out, I didn't have an irrigation system set up, and I would go out there during rush hour traffic and I would water the gardens, and I did it as to promote our business, because people would see me out there and they'd pull in and I'd talk to them. And we were really diligent about watering by hand. And once a few years ago, when we hooked up the irrigation system, after just a few days, we're like, my gosh, they look so much better. Because in containers, if you miss that watering, sometimes just by a couple of hours, it can really stress the plants.
Yeah.
The newest thing that we're doing right now, though, is we hooked up an injection system. So now each time our gardens, the irrigation goes off, it gets a micro dose of organic fertilizer each time. And that is making all the difference too. So it's just putting in those systems to help you out instead of going out and hand fertilizing, once every 2 weeks, to have that just micro injection of fertilizer every time the irrigation goes off. There's a lot of great products out there to use, and some people, they want to use synthetic, but there's a ton of amazing organic products out there. The company that we use, it's actually a local company that's been around since the 1970s. Again, when organic really first started taking hold, this company, it's Global Organics, it's BioFlora, and that's what we use, and have had just amazing results from. But there's a lot of products out there in the market that, if you can get those injection systems, and especially in larger scale gardens like we have, and some of the projects that we're working on, the more that you can automate those systems, it makes it easier for the consumer. They're just going to have a lot more enjoyment out of it, a lot more success, as we talked about earlier.
Yeah, and like we talk about at Agriscaping, you can have your beautiful garden and eat it too. And
exactly.
You could do more. And we've inadvertently, and we're getting close to the end of the time, but we've inadvertently gone through the 3 simple steps to gardening success, which we love to teach. And the first one we talked about was soil. Get your soil right. That's the first step. Second step is healthy starts. We talked about seeds, but I know at these raised gardens, we're planting some good starts in there. And so you get some good healthy starts. You get those plants started right. And then the step 3 was a healthy routine. And that routine is all about the systems. It's the systems and routines that you have. Whether it be your watering system, it's the routine of feeding them. Those things, if you can automate that, then you've got a very simple to manage, beautiful garden that's going to stay beautiful all the time and provide you many things that you wouldn't be able to provide on your own. Because I don't know about you, I can't grow. I might have a green thumb now and then, but I certainly can't eat that thumb. I've got to grow something.
Exactly.
So it's been great having you on, Alex. Always love talking to you. Always love seeing what kind of new creations you have with these things, hearing about the innovations that you're doing with Flower Street Urban Gardens. And also, one of the greatest innovations I love to see every time is the fact that not much changes about your gardens. And it's because it was such a divine design to begin with, I think. And
I believe so.
We keep learning from it, don't we? It's like, wow, it can do this too. Hey, look what it's doing.
Exactly.
Perfect.
And I just want to thank you for, coming up to us at that event and introducing yourself, because your friendship has been much appreciated and your knowledge has been priceless in many ways, is helping me resolve some issues and just have a better, deeper understanding of gardens. So I appreciate your friendship and all the knowledge that I've gotten from you. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. And for everybody out there, if you want to grow with us, you can do so. You can find us both online really easy at flowerstreeturbangardens.com to start growing a simple raised bed vertical garden of your own, as well as agriscaping.com for that information to help give you the support that you might need wherever you live, to know exactly what to plant, when to plant it, and how to plant it, and to get some access to some local pros, just like Alex. Alex is one of our certified guys here. We love to send people his way, and who can serve you where you live. And that's a really important piece of the puzzle. Make your system of growing food and growing things at home, make sure it's connected to your community, and we'd love to help you get connected wherever you're at. So we're going to sign off for today. Thanks again, Alex, for joining us. Keep growing.